UW-Madison has reached record levels of enrollment consecutively in recent years. Though acceptance rates have fluctuated, the incoming class size has increased significantly since 2021, driven by a larger volume of applications. With state-of-the-art resources and majors available, the institution continues to expand and provide students with the Wisconsin experience. However, behind this growth, there lies a struggling housing system, impacting the campus and wider community. But what caused this crisis? What is being done to remedy the situation? Today, we talk to professionals in the Madison community to better understand what's going on.
What's interesting about this from my perspective is we've seen a decrease in emergency aid requests, which, if I put it in context with the pandemic, it makes sense to me because before the pandemic, we had a certain level of emergency requests that would come in. And then during the pandemic, that spiked super high. There was just a ton of emergency funding requests coming in constantly. We also had access to federal emergency funding for students. So we were kind of a pass-through for a lot of emergency funding that was also provided by the federal government, which was significantly more than what the UW-Madison had set aside for emergency funding, because this was millions of dollars provided by the federal government directly for student relief, as you may or may not know. And then as we've gotten further and further away from the 2020 and 2021 years, we've kind of seen the requests decline. And so I wouldn't say that it's declining because necessarily like students don't have the same needs. It's just that it was so high during the pandemic that at this point in time, I couldn't imagine a time in which we'd get back to that unless there was another pandemic. So where we're at now is we're looking to be closer to that pre-pandemic time in which students were requesting emergency funds, but not at the levels of 2020 and 2021. We make it pretty simple for students to request emergency aid as well. We have an e-form that's embedded in the student center that they can go to and request those funds. And then we evaluate those to determine if the student is eligible. Another reason why we might not be seeing the same increase, in addition to us not being in the pandemic, is we've hired a basic needs case manager for our campus. This is the first time that we've ever had anybody in a position like that. That started in June, actually. A very interested donor decided to fund that position for our campus. And so it's possible that we're still seeing the requests, but we're able to triage them earlier in the process and connect students to different types of resources because we have that basic needs case manager in place who's working with students directly.
According to UW News, the average cost of rent is $1,273 per bed, and only 31% of units surveyed are priced below the $1,000 a month threshold. Many students turn to living in the dorms again beyond their freshman year to combat the rising prices. However, with dorms at 115% capacity, many students are fighting for spots in converted doubles turned triples and lounge spaces turned mass occupancy dorm rooms. The construction of new dorms on campus is much easier said than done. Madison is the only Big Ten school that lacks bonding authority. What does this mean? It means that the university does not have the ability to independently borrow money by issuing bonds for capital projects according to state law. We turned to a representative from UW Housing to answer our questions firsthand. University Housing is a fully self-funded operation, with all funding coming from room and board revenues and other income. For on-campus housing, new construction requires approval by the state legislature and governor, and this was not included in the 2025-27 biennial capital budget.
I was talking to high school students about how they were going to go to how they were going to go to college and how they were going to use or look for scholarships in that process. Um, During that process, because it's like I am going to UW-Madison, a lot of students, especially lower income students, are particularly price sensitive to what they can afford and are looking for scholarships to be able to provide those minimum pieces, like those tuition and fees, room, food, books. Like they're very much thinking about how can I get enough financial aid to pay for each of these elements, um, while also planning on working and working all through high school to have that money to help them in college. The further you get away from central campus, the cheaper the housing is. But then there's all these decisions you have to make about where you're going to work. How long is it going to take me to get from here to there? So those are kind of the choices that a lot of people who have to make. And I think the most price sensitive students, the lowest income students, have to make those choices and have an idea of how much is your time worth, that not everybody has to think about.